My name is Stefan, and I recently took the online GMAT, and I wanted to share a little bit about my experience so that you might be better prepared for when you do take the online GMAT as well. So, first, the interim online GMAT is currently available only from April 20th through June 15th, 2020. So, about 2 months. It's live proctored with 24/7 availability over this time period, facilitated by Pearson VUE. Now, Pearson is the testing entity that facilitates most GMAT in person. So they're familiar with the test and they've put together a really simple registration process because they're familiar with the GMAT. Now, currently allowed one administration of the online GMAT. That's it. It's going to take about up to 14 days to get the official score report. And when you get your official score report, you're able to decide if you want to send it out to potential schools that you're applying to. But that score report will be indicated as an online GMAT. So you won't have to worry about people not knowing whether you were taking an online GMAT or the standard version. It will be indicated so that you can explain potentially some differences in scores if that's what happens. Now, the standard GMAT has a flexible section order and an essay, whereas the online GMAT only has 3 sections: quant, verbal, and integrated reasoning, and the integrated reasoning is optional. So technically, you don't necessarily have to take the IR if it's not required for whatever program you're applying to. You are able to take physical notes for the standard exam, but not for the online exam. So the online exam gets rid of the yellow sheet of dry erase marker that is the normal note-taking method for the exam, and instead gives you an online whiteboard. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment as well. Now, with the standard exam, you get an unofficial score at the end, and you're allowed to cancel upon seeing that unofficial score if you're not satisfied with it. Online GMAT, however, there are no cancellations and no unofficial score nor enhanced score report is available for the online version of this test. They're extremely concerned about the test integrity, and that's also why there isn't even a break between the quantitative and verbal for the online GMAT. You only get an optional 5-minute break between the verbal and that optional integrated reasoning section. They are very, very concerned with test integrity, which as a business school applicant should be reassuring so that you know this test is taken as seriously as the standard GMAT. You can see from GMAT Club here, I've got a sample whiteboard tool that has all of the functionality of the actual whiteboard. So what I discovered while taking the exam is that there are really only a couple of tools that I would even begin to engage with. For geometry, the freeform shape tool is actually quite helpful because you can draw a, say, pentagon like home plate here really quite easily. But the challenge becomes that I have to notate the thing with a text box. So if I want to say this is a side of 8, and then I want to say this is a side of 6, and this is a side of 6, I can do that, but it's really hard to use their little actual tool here to draw things because I got to do it very slowly with my mouse. They won't allow a stylus. So to facilitate faster taking of notes, what I usually would recommend is first clear the whiteboard before every question. And then instead of setting up your information in a pseudo handwriting with the little pen tool, instead just use a text box. And you can expand out the text box here. Usually I just put my whiteboard over about 1/4 of the screen in the lower half, depending on how it was set up. And then you want to take your notes rather than setting up the scratch pad in advance, which I usually recommend students do. So that means like A and then B and then C and then D, then E. Because here you can see I can actually arrow cursors and maneuver around, which would make things easier. On the actual whiteboard itself for the exam, you cannot do that. You have to use your mouse, and there isn't even a cursor present. So it's really hard to maneuver around once you've got information written down. And you can see they actually do have the right replication in that you cannot just like highlight things in that nature like you might expect from, say, a Word document. So instead, what I recommend test takers do is to take your notes in a linear fashion and just spend a little bit more time up front trying to figure out the best path forward for the question. So here, I'd write out something to the effect of f of a plus b is supposed to be equal to fa plus f of b if a is greater than 0 and b is greater than 0. So this shows me that I know I probably want to plug in here. So I'm just going to be proactive and plug in values for A and B that are easy that I can then test out. So I'm going to say A is equal to 4 and B is equal to 5. Then I can just test out my answer choices as I go along. So I've got A, this is going to be x squared. So just use a little caret to indicate x squared. So I'm supposed to test 4 plus 5. And I want to see if that squared is equal to 4 squared plus 5 squared. Of course, the answer is no, because 9 squared is not equal to 16 plus 25. So I just put an x next to this and move on to the next answer choice. So then we've got x plus 1 as our setup. And you can see once you get into the rhythm, it goes relatively quickly, because then I'm just looking at, because I can just do 4 plus 5 together, 9 plus 1, and I know that is not equal to 4 plus 1 plus 5 plus 1, because that would be 11 as opposed to 10. So that is out as well. Then we test choice C, and it's hard with some of the weirder functions to like write it out. There is no square root key on this little text box or your keyboard probably, but I can just write radical 9, and I want to say, is that equal to radical 4 plus radical 5? And of course, 3 is not equal to 2 plus radical 5, so I can eliminate this answer choice as well. Then for choice D, we have 2 divided by 9 supposedly equal to, but is not equal to, 2 divided by 4 plus 2 divided by 5. You know, those two things are not equal, so that gets x'd out. And then choice E is going to be negative 3 times x, and you see that we have negative 3 times 9, because that's going to be 4 plus 5, of course, and that's going to be equal to negative 27. And you can see I like to put just vertical lines because that kind of differentiates things vertically here. And then we've got to see if negative 3 times 4 plus negative 3 times 5, and that's going to be equal to negative 12 plus negative 15, which is equal to negative 27. And of course, this is our correct answer. And I found myself just taking note of that using some exclamation points. You're probably going to have to close the whiteboard in order to make all of your selections. There's a little pop-up button that usually shows up right around here that asks, do you want to confirm your selection? And I found that in most cases, it was just easier to close out the whiteboard. But you saw that if you work the whiteboard well, you can actually manage this okay when it comes to working through a whiteboard as opposed to working with a handwritten scratch pad.